What up, man? It's been a while, mainly because life, continually lifing. I am almost on the back end of what has been a very long run of consecutive events that I've had to go to. Multiple weddings, multiple birthdays, big holidays. I got a couple hours before I got to dip out to go to my girlfriend's Christmas celebration, which is happening on Christmas Eve. Anyway, I gotta talk about some sports. This is Loose Thoughts. If you've not been around long enough, there's Loose Thoughts number 1 somewhere around the stream at some point. I think there's actually a playlist for them, but this is just a podcast where I don't allow myself to use notes. I come up with topics and I just kind of like ramble about them. I'm not even ramble, honestly. When I get to use free-flowing thoughts, I come up with more coherent stuff, I like to think sometimes. And when I use my notes, I get to inform people a lot more. But I guess podcasting is supposed to be more this than the other thing that I do. But my podcast is an attempt to try and be an adult. So Loose Thoughts topics today. Keep it pretty simple as I fade out the intro music. Get to it real quick, man. Anyway, let's talk about it. We got a couple things to talk about. So, Simone, Bile's husband. We're going to talk about the Detroit Pistons and just going to dump information in my brain about the NFL currently right now because I've missed, I want to say, like 3 episodes of my preview and review podcast where I talk about everything going on in the NFL. We'll like to say this crazy thing, watched every single game, just haven't done the podcast because watching the games is ridiculously time consuming, and by the time I finish watching the games I have a billion other things that I have to do. Anyway, today's schedule is scrolling in the ticker today. That's pretty much it. So let's talk about this situation in context. This instance right here has given me yet another example of, and tell me if I'm wrong in the chat if you're out there watching. By the way, like and subscribe if you're not already, have not already liked the video or not subscribed already. We're up to 30, trying to get a couple more, a couple million more in there, but it starts with just a single drop of water before it becomes an ocean. Anyway, things to take away from this. I've gotten to the point now where I listen to podcasts more than I listen to music a lot more. Like, it's like massive imbalance. I actually don't listen to music for the sake of listening to podcasts. Most of the music I listen to is like show tunes from musicals, but that's another discussion for another day. But I listen to podcasts like almost every day around the clock. And that's an important factor in what I'm talking about right now. I have gotten to the point where when people post podcast clips, there's 2 types of podcast clips. One's intentionally meant to deceive, and then there's the promo clips, which are the ones that are also in the similar vein, but not the same thing. Most times when you're posting promo clips, you're trying to put the most salacious part of your podcast or the hottest take from your podcast out of context on purpose to get people to go and view it, or more than likely to generate engagement underneath whatever social media platform that you posted on. And then we live in this world now where there's the do your research crowd. Right? And do your research typically means like you need to look at these weird YouTube videos that I've been looking at. Not these weird YouTube videos. These are weird YouTube videos that I make. They're just not the kind that I'm referring to, and you know exactly what I'm talking about. There's an avenue of people who are obsessed with the idea that everything around them is a lie constantly, and they're the only people that know the truth. Anyway, that being said, two types of podcast clips. One's disingenuously trying to misinform, and then promo clips. Promo clips a lot of the time are people trying to generate interest for their podcast by either intentionally going viral to let people know, like, once again, like, you go to the reason that Charmin buys advertisements during big events, sporting events or otherwise, is not because they want you, not because they believe that it will result in direct, like, I saw Charmin on a commercial, I'm going to go out and get Charmin. What they want is to establish like brand recognition, obviously, so that when you go to the store and next time you're trying to figure out like, what kind of toilet paper should I get? Well, I'm gonna get the thing that I've actually heard of, right? And whether it's actually a high quality product or not, you have heard of it, right? So it's like the Johnny Depp not Johnny Depp, it's the Captain Jack Sparrow situation where he's like, you're Captain Jack Sparrow, like one of the most horrific pirates on the face of the planet. So he's like, so you have heard of me, right? That's one of those things, right? But it doesn't matter. That's why they say all press is good press. Anyway, very recently, the podcast that I actually listened to I've listened to almost every single episode except the ones that have musical guests, and even then I've listened to some of the ones that have musical guests. It's called the Pivot Podcast. So to give background of where that podcast is born of, because I think it's important to put it in context, right? The podcast is hosted by three former NFL players. Two of you, if you're a big NFL fan, you've heard of all three of these guys. If you are a casual NFL fan, you've heard of one of them, I would say. Fred Taylor, who is up for the Hall of Fame, the NFL Hall of Fame again. He's a semifinalist again because he's one of the best running backs, not only in the history of the Jacksonville Jaguars, but one of the best running backs in the NFL. He's got like crazy records despite the number of games that he's played in. Fred Taylor used to be guaranteed 100 yards when he played in the NFL every single Sunday. That's how good he was. He played on a bunch of really shitty teams. I will give him credit for that, and performed really well. He was the backbone of their offense vast majority of the seasons he was there. Ryan Clark, he will tell you a story very easily. I'm pretty sure they have it cut out somewhere on the Pivot Podcast YouTube channel, but Ryan Clark is probably the most prominent of the three guys because he is an ESPN analyst that Stephen A. Smith has even mentioned that he believes that Ryan Clark can replace him one day at ESPN in terms of hype. Ryan Clark, very intelligent person, very smart person, also very religious. Just to give you some context to him as a human being, he talks about it in this podcast incident. It was not even an incident because that's what we're going to talk about. Ryan Clark, undrafted free agent, meaning that he was not selected in the NFL draft, meaning that after the draft was over, when they select all the players that they wanted from the year that he entered his name into the draft, he had to wait on a phone call to get an invitation to training camp to sign a deal that only lasted until training camp. So he had to earn a roster spot, and he basically has been he was on that path his entire NFL career. The peak of his NFL career is it starts to rain hard as shit on a Christmas Eve afternoon here in Houston, Texas. Anyway, Ryan Clark, football player, got it basically from the ground up. Like, he's essentially like a real rags to riches story in the NFL, because there's nothing more difficult than being an undrafted free agent and working your way to where Ryan Clark has gotten himself to, right? He's on ESPN, I want to say almost every single day. The Pivot Podcast is a product of the fact that I Am Athlete, which was led by Brandon Marshall, had some business dealings that I think some of the people involved didn't like. And so Channing Crowder and Fred Taylor, who are the other, Channing Crowder is the other host of this show. He is he's a former Miami Dolphins linebacker, and like I said before, if you're an NFL fan from like the early 2000s, you know who Channing Crowder is. He was pretty good when he played. And all three of them make up what is called the Pivot Podcast. They are three black men who have worked very, very hard to get to where they're at, and that most of it is via athletics, right? Not anything else. They are interesting as a trio together. And Ryan Clark is typically, because 99% of their podcasts are them interviewing someone. They have a couple where they kind of give some opinions, and I think that was more for they had to get some kind of podcast out that week because of ads, right? They have ad responsibilities, and they got to put something out to be able to put the ads in there, which is a strange concept in podcasting that is like very, very real, where you got to put together a show so that you can read your ads, right? And some of it is actually fun, but you can definitely tell when it is happening. Anyway, going back to what I was saying before, so all three of those guys compose this thing called the Pivot Podcast. They are all NFL wealthy. From what I understand, they still have all their money. Ryan Clark is still active in media. Same thing with Channing Crowder and Fred Taylor. Fred Taylor was a part of one of the most important college football teams in the history of college football. All three of them are on TV, and they host this show together. So they have Inside the NFL, which I think has Fred Taylor and Channing Crowder, and they all work together on this podcast because, they have it going in the direction that they wanted to go in, whereas they didn't like what was going on with I Am Athlete. And it's actually been like kind of this big back and forth in the podcasting world, at least the black podcasting world, black sports podcasting world, because Brandon Marshall has had a couple of moments that have clearly gone over the line in some people's viewpoints and some people's ideas, and most of that is centered around moments where he tries to. He's a person that tries to talk like he's quote unquote. If you're in the black community, you know what I'm talking about. He tries to talk all proper and stuff, even though that's not how he normally talks. And it's like very clearly he tries to change into a different person when he's on his podcast. And also he's had that one moment where he screamed into the void, almost like to prove every woman that's ever thought like anything about, you know what, there's a moment where Brandon Marshall is having a discussion on the podcast about how NBA contracts are not guaranteed. That is not true. There are non-guaranteed NBA contracts, but 99% of them are guaranteed. Brandon Marshall gets into a back and forth with this co-host, and I think his guest is in the room as well while he's doing this, and he like gets to the point where he's yelling, and you can see the veins on his neck and his head about how, because he's like trying to convince people that this thing that he knows to be true is true, and it's just not. Like 99% of people, even 10-day contracts in the NBA are guaranteed, right? There are non-guaranteed contracts in the NBA, but it's a very rare occurrence on a roster. And that went viral, and people clowned him for it, and he tried to play it off like the following week, and then a couple months later, the podcast breaks up. Anyway, what was I saying? Oh, the Pivot Podcast. It is 3 former NFL players. They host a show where they interview people from all walks of life, typically other football players. Recently, they had Jonathan Owens on. If you do not know who Jonathan Owens is, congratulations, you're just like a regular person, right? You're even if you are like a hardcore NFL fan, I don't think you would know who Jonathan Owens is for the most part, because the reason I know who Jonathan Owens is because of what's on the Chiron over here. He is the former Texans player that was dating Simone Biles. If you don't know, Simone Biles, greatest gymnast, literally the greatest gymnast to ever walk the earth. Kind of wild. From Houston, Texas. From Houston, Texas. Adopted, lives here in Houston, and her husband, is Jonathan Owens, NFL football player. And on the Pivot Podcast, he talked about a multitude of things. For instance, his late development as an athlete overall. He talked about how he didn't know that his ACL was torn until he was in a track meet and his knee started to swell up. And it was after his ACL had been torn for like quite some time or something like that. He went Division II to play football. He was so good at the Division II level that NFL scouts showed up and figured, they showed up to check him out, and he found his way into the NFL. He has now been in the league, I want to say, for 5 or 7 years or something like that. The podcast, they interview Jonathan, and it's actually a really good conversation with Jonathan about his struggles and how he's gotten to where he is, because there is nobody who gets to the NFL or to the professional sports level in a normal manner. Nobody gets there like, oh yeah, like I worked hard, I lifted weights and stuff like that. Nothing ever went wrong. I never had any injuries. I never had any situation where I had to make these huge decisions, which is what the Pivot Podcast is about. It's they ask the question at the end to almost every single guest that comes on, what was your biggest pivot in life? Some of the guys are too young to have an answer at the time, but some of them are like older players. Like they've had Devin Hester on, who's a former teammate of Fred Taylor. So great conversations. I would definitely 100% suggest you check out the Pivot Podcast, because it is a great example of what athletes talking to athletes on podcasts can look like, and something that is worth your time. It's not just dudes dicking around back and forth, kind of like everybody's obsessed with this concept of like locker room talk being on a podcast, and it's just like it's not supposed to be. Like when it comes to like locker room talk, it is a curated conversation between people that you trust are going to understand and hear you out to a certain degree, right? A lot more things are loose to be said, and the prime example of these situations is every time, and this is the point I was trying to get to at the beginning, every time these podcast clips come out, they are either intentionally or unintentionally without context. And I'm not here to try and cape for the Pivot Podcast or anything like that, but this is another example of what happens when you take 15, 30 seconds of an hour plus conversation and put it on the internet. there are some people who, and once again, like some people are aware and some people are unaware of their natural occurring biases, right? And that influences and informs how they react to certain things. If you're a person that doesn't like Ryan Clark or Channing Crowder and Fred Taylor, understandable. Some people don't like those guys. I'm sure for a multitude of reasons, whatever it may be. They eliminated your favorite team from the playoffs. They said something that you didn't like a couple episodes. There's been multiple times where like they've said things that I was just kind of like, I don't think that that's cool for you to have said that on the podcast. But they are far from a lot of the childish as fuck frat boy type energy that I get from other NFL podcasts that are hosted by NFL players. They are far from the toxic masculinity that you get from dudes that are like gym bros and all this kind of stuff like that. They are guys who have come from different walks of life. Have for the most part, all three of them made it from the bottom. Like they came from poverty and are now rich, which of course changes the way you look at the world around you, right? At all times. That's just how it goes. That's how it goes. Maybe I'll be able to tell you about it one day. But they had a conversation with Jonathan Owens, who is a current NFL player for the Green Bay Packers. At one point, Simone Biles, his wife, walks into the room to watch him do the interview. I thought at one point when all this was going down that Simone Biles was... I thought this was going down and Simone Biles was being interviewed by the Pivot podcast, because that would have been huge for them, because Simone Biles, out of the two of them, Jonathan Owens is far lesser of fame than Simone Biles, right? Most of his fame is, and there's no question about it whatsoever, most of his fame is directly correlated to the fact that his wife is the greatest gymnast in the history of gymnastics. Now, there's one thing I'll address off the top before we get into some of the comments that were made during the show. Jonathan Owens, multiple times over, I think I've heard this before, like years before, Jonathan Owens did not know who Simone Biles was when he hit her up, right? Like he did not know who she was as an act. He was not familiar with her game, as some people would say. Now that's led to a series of people trying to deny that they try and say, oh, this is just like male ego being like, oh, I didn't even know who she was. I just saw this pretty girl and I like walked up to her and I said, what's up, girl? How's it going? So on the show, he actually explains how he met Simone Biles. It was via Raya, which, by the way, wild move by Jonathan Owens to drop that Raya is the app that got them together and not get any bread off of it. Maybe they have, maybe they have in some way, shape, or form. But Raya is, if you're unfamiliar with it, Raya is a dating app for famous people, essentially, or like professional famous people, like NFL players. People joke about the podcast I listen to. People joke about how there's like a shit ton of DJs that are on there all the time. It's for famous people to match with other famous people, because there's just a certain lifestyle that you may or may not understand if you're just like a regular, everyday, average person. Like there are people on Raya that cannot walk into the grocery store without somebody trying to take a photo with them. And I'm gonna be honest with you, as a person who's at one point had a very small amount of local, very concentrated fame in a small area of Houston, I've only been approached to take a photo with in public like 3 times, and it's a wild experience. I can't imagine what it's like for a lady of the stature of Simone Biles, right? That was not a short joke. That was just me talking about how she is one of the most iconic athletes in the history of America, which makes her one of the most iconic athletes in the history of the world, right? He met her on Raya, the app, and he did not know who she was leading up to it. There's a series of people who are saying that Jonathan Owens is lying about not knowing Simone Biles. I'll say this. This is like one of those two American situations. Jonathan Owens is from, according to his own testament, a rough part of St. Louis. And if you know anything about the history or anything about gymnastics as a whole, gymnastics is a very expensive sport that is not readily available in every single field, right? Like it is not, there's not high. So football is an expensive sport, but you go to damn near 99% of the schools in America got a football team, right? Regardless of how expensive it is. It may not be nice. You may have the bookshelf pads or whatever. You may have like the oldest helmet on the face of the planet, but it passed the concussion protocol stuff. But facts are, They got a football team. By hell or high water, they got a football team, right? Gymnastics, extremely expensive, not readily available at like most high school levels, right? Gymnastics is one of the solely club level sports that is at the Olympic level, right? You can compete against world-class talent before you turn 18 if you compete in gymnastics. That happens on a regular basis. Simone is a perfect example of that. She's from Houston. I can't even think of a high school in Houston that has a gymnastics team because, one, insurance, two, money to run it, and then three, coaches to find the coach high school gymnastics, right? They want people who are dedicated, and that means you got to pay your way, right? Dedication in sports is shown by your ability to pay up or be so good that people are willing to pay for you. At some point, somebody got to pay. Whether it's you or somebody else, somebody got to open their pocketbook, right? Jonathan Owens, to his admitted by the way, in the podcast, admits later on, he's from a part of town in St. Louis, which at one point, and I don't know, probably, Jonathan Owens is actually probably old enough to have had this happen. St. Louis was like the murder capital of the world or some shit like that for a small chunk of time. And he probably grew up in that time period. Same thing. Nelly's talked about this before. St. Louis is a rough place. And even to the credit of that, later on in the podcast, Jonathan Owens talks about how his stepfather got shot coming out of a grocery store or something like that. So, that's a huge part of this. That's a huge part of this aspect. He's from the hood or from a part of town where like gymnastics is not a thing, right? So how would he know that Simone was like that level? There's people who are talking about like he tweeted about the Olympics when it was going on, but he doesn't know who Simone Biles is. I'm like, well, she competes in the Summer Olympics, which is also when like Team USA basketball is competing, and there's a good chunk of people who just watch Team USA basketball, right? Team USA basketball is a big enough team that you pay attention to that. Now I can understand how like he probably has watched. He's probably watched some kind of highlight package where they've talked about Simone Biles, because guess what? Like pretty much every single time that she stepped out onto the mat, she has broken a record. She even has her own signature move that was born out of the fact that she like hurt her leg one time. Like that's the craziest story. Her move is called the Biles, and it is because she had an injured leg. So she decided, you know what I'm going to do? What most people try and do off two legs, I'm going to do off one. Right? And it's a high scoring move, and she does it perfectly all the time. Anyway, it's a crazy clip. Look it up. Look at the absolutely insane power that Simone has in her body. But the comments that he makes on the podcast, going back to what we were talking about before, I believe Jonathan Owens when he said he had never heard of Simone Biles. Maybe he had seen her in passing and like had no idea who she was, like in terms of like what the name means and all that kind of jazz like that. Gymnastics is a sport that people in America care about once every 4 years. Let's be real. Especially if you're, and this is like a cultural thing, right? There's not many black people that compete in gymnastics. So there's not many people that draw the eyes of black people to that sport. It is a predominantly white sport. And that is directly correlated to some socioeconomic situation, or just economics in general, because gymnastics is extremely expensive from a very early on age all the way until you stop doing it. And only I think when it comes to the all-around, they have a cap on how many people from your country can make it. So if you want to win the all-around gold medal, which is the cream of the crop medals in the gymnastics, any event that you make at the gymnastics level or at the Olympic level is insane. But the all-around medal is meaning that you competed in the four major events at the Olympics against the other people who are doing the same thing. You win the gold medal. That means you are the best gymnast on the planet. Simone Biles has done that multiple times. And she did it with the Fierce Five, right? With like Gabby Douglas, right? Gabby Douglas and Simone Biles are probably the two most prominent black gymnasts that have ever walked the earth in America, right? And probably in the world, because once again, gymnastics is very expensive. And I can totally understand how a dude who's from St. Louis, who probably had never met a person who had competed in gymnastics, up until, there's no telling. He probably literally had never met a person who competed in gymnastics ever until he met Simone. And then that kind of comes out of it, right? That's one aspect I'll address. The other one is, on the show, he says, Channing Crowder, who is the former Miami Dolphins linebacker, speaks up and interrupts Ryan Clark's question. He's like, hey, man, I got to know, how did you get a catch like Simone Biles, establishing two things. Something that continuously happens throughout the course of this podcast. At no point does Channing Crowder and Fred Taylor agree with Jonathan Owens. So 2 out of 3 hosts never engaged in this hilarious statement that is to follow. Jonathan Owens says, I always feel like the men are the catch. And I'm like, broad sweeping statement with no scientific background or evidence to come from it. So you think every time in the history of a relationship, the man has been the catch. Obviously one of the most toxic male concepts that you can possibly cook up in your mind. I would say it would borderline on the verge of stupidity, right? And those comments are out there. I will say this. There's some other comments later on in the podcast that show this may or may not have been a joke that he was trying to pass off, and it just didn't go over well. And I'll say this. There is something about... So Jonathan Owens makes that comment. And from that moment on, you try and kind of like look at everything through the lens of what he has said, because that's how words work. Words mean things, as one other famous podcaster has said many times over. Shout out to King Crystal. But yeah, words mean things. So when you say stupid shit like, I think that men are always the catch, I always say that men are the catch, and I'm like, man, you sound like a dude who's not met a lot of dudes, my guy. Or you sound like a dude who's just like believes that men are better than women at any given point, which is wild, because you're married to a woman. Anyway, that being said, his situation that ensues after this, he says, I always think the men are the catch. Wild concept. Wild, absolutely insane concept, because I've seen women. I have seen, thanks to the magics of Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, and all these other social media platforms, and thanks to the amazing life that I've been lucky enough to lead for 31 years, I've seen some beautiful women who are amazing inside and out. And it is hard for me to believe that there's ever a time where you can definitively say that always in the history of humanity that men have been the catch for women. It's not how it goes, and it's not how it's gonna go. I have to believe that such a dumb statement is some form of a joke, and maybe he's just not good at delivery. There's a reason that there are comedians and there are people who tell jokes, right? They're two different classes of people for a reason, and maybe this is one of those examples. They continue the conversation. Ryan Clark butts in, and I have to believe that this is tactical on the part of Ryan Clark to try and lean into such an absurd statement, because I know Ryan Clark. I've heard Ryan Clark talk about women prior to the 30 seconds in this podcast. Look, I've heard Ryan Clark and how he speaks about his wife, and how he speaks about how he is a man who demands respect for women, right? This is... So I can only believe that he was buying into what Jonathan Owens thought. Either something that Jonathan Owens said with his whole chest, or he said it as a joke, right? Either way, I do not believe Ryan Clark was actually insinuating the fact that, Jonathan Owens is the one that, Simone Biles is the one that's actually lucky, right? He says that in the podcast, and you can hear Channing Crowder and Fred Taylor laughing. Now, the question is whether they're laughing together with Jonathan Owens, or they're laughing at Jonathan Owens, because the idea that, you could think that about Simone Biles is so absurd that it is truly hilarious. And I've heard, we've all met our fair share of shitty dudes. I've also met these guys who kind of like make these little jabs at their partner because they have that kind of confidence in their relationship, right? Where it's like, he's like, yeah, guys, she's like the greatest gymnast of all time, but I'm the guy that she's lucky to be dating, kind of deal. He goes into discussing... and I'll say this, what does not help his case of it being a joke is he goes in to describe what the dating experience was like for her, what the Raya situation happened was. They both matched with each other, so he liked her first, which means I guess, I don't know if it happens like that, but he liked her profile first. He showed up in her profile, they linked up, she went to his Instagram, liked a bunch of his posts according to him. He came back, and then he chose to continue to not talk to her. I don't know what that's about. I've never been... I, myself, don't know what it's like to be what people consider to be an attractive or a hot guy or whatever. So I don't know what the life is like when attractive women talk to me. I talk back almost immediately when I was single. Like for instance, my girlfriend texts me every day, and I text her as soon as I wake up, because when attractive women talk to me, I talk back. Anyway, that situation happens. He says he like took a shower and continued to not respond, kind of deal or whatever. And then she messaged him like hi or something like that. And after that, that's when they started to connect with each other and all this kind of stuff. And this was during 2020, during COVID. And apparently she drove like 45 minutes to go hang out with them. I will point this out. If you're from Houston, 45 minutes is not that long a drive. That's just a fact. That's just how it is. So he's got that going on. It doesn't make him look good, because it feels like the reason he told the Raya story, one, he's probably told it that way 1,000,000,001 times, but when you tell it in when you tell it on a big stage like the Pivot podcast, because they do have a lot of views, they do have a lot of subscribers, they do have people who are really prominent on the show on a regular basis. When you tell a story like that, it makes it look like you're trying to like punk Simone Biles. And there's a lot of people who are understandably very defensive about Simone Biles because, one, she's a black woman. So there's just inherently a larger number of people that hate her existence just for the fact that she's a black woman. And then two, she's a successful woman, which if you know people, there's plenty of people who every breath they take is to tear down women they perceive should not be in a position of power that they should be in. Because once again, like Jonathan said, there's some people out there who really do believe that men are the catch in every single relationship that they're in. Anyway, yeah, so the conversation continues on. This is the other thing, too. Ryan Clark came out and did a video on the, like, you need to have context to the full situation, which I always think is a bullshit cop-out for the most part, because if you're interviewing someone and you're not thorough enough in your interview, and then after people watch the interview, they still come out with the same thought process, that means you didn't do your job as an interviewer. I will point this out. Most of the people who are commenting on the internet have not watched the entire episode. I actually watched it before I did this podcast so that I could think about everything that happened along the way. So I can point out these things that happened after the 30-second clip that most people saw goes away. Jonathan credits Simone with helping revitalize his career and helping keep him like afloat as an athlete. He has a moment where, because like Simone Biles points out how Simone Biles has a moment where she points out how Jonathan, when he's on the field, looks like he's thinking too much. Which, hey, guess what? I don't know if you noticed or not. Simone competes in a sport that is so intense that hesitation typically ends up with bones being broken. The price to pay for hesitation is very high in gymnastics on a regular basis. So she may know a thing or two about looking like you're thinking too much. And he actually mentions, he's like, if it was any other woman other than like somebody of her stature, I would have never taken what she said to heart, because I know the level that she competes at, and it spurred him to go see a sports psychologist. So they also apparently go to therapy together. So once again, sounds like he's trying to improve as a human being. I have a strange feeling they're going to talk about that Pivot podcast episode in therapy. There's so many instances where he credits Simone for what she has done to his life, and to his life, that is for the better. Now, I can because I'll tell you what order this happens in. All the compliments, and because he's like, I love her, I can't wait to for us to be together for the rest of my life. He talks about how he was on the phone with her before she had to pull out of the Olympic Games, because she had lost her proprioception essentially, which is a crazy concept if you are a gymnast, to lose your ability to track where you are in the air, something you've done 1,000,000 times over. He talks about being on the phone with her and how brave she is and how strong she is as a human being. And I'm sure there's plenty of other podcasts where Jonathan Owens and Simone Biles have been on there together, and they've had multiple conversations in front of a camera about how much he loves Simone Biles. Now, I will point this out. Very weird comments to make in general about the whole I think men are always the catch in a relationship. It's hard for me to kind of wipe that away as like a joke that he was telling, which is kind of weird. It's just a weird statement to make. And I would also like to point out, I'm sure Simone Biles is not super gung-ho to be in a relationship with a person that's a fanboy, right? Like, they're married. And then somebody even tried to bring up previous relationships that she had where she tried to advocate for her guy. She has a moment in the podcast where she talks about how in a couple years, nobody's going to know him as Simone Biles' husband. They're going to know me as Jonathan Owens' wife. Now, they were talking about, and this is the funny part, the statement before is about how you're always going to be like Simone Biles' husband because she's like that ridiculously good. Like I pointed out before, Ryan Clark, Channing Crowder, Fred Taylor, almost every single turn, every single step of the way, they are trying to, like, they're essentially clowning Jonathan Owens for the fact that, like, bro, like, whatever you, like, because I think Channing Crowder, before they make this statement about the whole, like, Simone Biles' wife, Jonathan Owens' husband, Channing Crowder's like, you ain't never gonna be a safety as good as she is at gymnastics, bro. Because that would mean you're the greatest of all time and that you changed the way that football operates. And then she jumped in and tried to say that statement to support her husband, right? Despite the fact that what Channing Crowder said was 100% true, Jonathan Owens is never going to be what Simone Biles is to gymnastics, to safety at football. It's just not going to happen. If it was going to, because he's already, like 7 years behind, because he's like 20 something. Simone Biles was the GOAT when she was 15, bro. Like, Simone Biles is the greatest gymnast of all time when she was 15, my guy. Yeah, so it's not going to happen for you, bro, and that's okay. But she stepped in to defend her guy, to defend her husband, and I think a lot of people would like that, but I would also like a little bit of honesty with that whole situation. Simone, you ain't have to do that. You ain't have to stand up for that dude, but I get it. He's your husband. You love him. You don't like it when people try and do the whole, like, comparing your careers and being like, but I will say this, I don't know how much Simone checks Jonathan Owens on his ego about how good of a football player he is, because quite frankly, like I said before, didn't know who Jonathan Owens was until he started dating Simone Biles. I'd seen him play football before, and I'm sure he's an immensely talented football player. I've seen him play before. I know his vertical numbers and all his combine testing numbers and stuff like that. And actually, the Pivot podcast gave me a little bit of insight into how good that guy is. He made it from D2 football to the NFL, which is crazy. But yeah, man, like, that's just how it goes, bro. Like, that's how your life, like, and it's not even a part that he signs up for, because he actually mentions that about how she handles being famous, because he talks about how they go out and people swarm her, and he didn't know how big a deal she was until she got swarmed at some event or whatever. And it's like, yeah, Simone Biles is literally like an icon in America, for women in general and for athletes in general, because she was brave enough that in her lowest moment, she stood up for other people. In her lowest moment where she couldn't compete on the world stage that she wanted to compete in, that she could not, that she stood up and said, it's not just me, it's other people that suffer just like me, but they don't have the convenience to be able to step away from what they're doing. Make sure you're looking out for each other, right? She stepped up for it, and once again, she stepped up. I feel like the Jonathan Owens that she met all those years ago, a couple years ago, I guess this is like 3 years ago or whatever. The Jonathan Owens that she met 3 years ago, she probably has gotten, she's probably made him into a better person off of him being around her. And also, like, her mentality and her approach to sports clearly is rubbed off on him in a positive way that he mentioned multiple times towards the end of that podcast. So, in totality, most of the people who are on the internet have not watched the entire episode, which, if you don't watch the whole episode, I totally understand. The order of the events in the episode is crazy ass comments about how the men are always the catch, and then all the nice things about Simone Biles. Totally understand. But it is 100% wild that he would say that statement. But I'd like to point out Channing Crowder, Fred Taylor, and Ryan Clark, who even at some point, like I said before, I've heard Ryan Clark speak about women. It's hard for me to believe that he was being genuine about the whole, like, oh, so she got lucky that she met you. And I felt like he meant it as a question to make him reiterate. He's like, you're going to have to explain that one to me, dog. You're going to have to explain to me how this beautiful black woman who is also immensely talented has literally done stuff that's never been done before, and you, football player, are the catch. professional football player ought to catch in this situation. I didn't listen to Ryan Clark's video on this whole thing. Because he's had to go on Twitter and respond like multiple times over to different things that have happened on this podcast. And none of them are like these type of toxic male situations. Some of them are giving people, like for instance, most recently, Chad Ochocinco opened his mouth and said something stupid about Keith Lee without literally never seeing a single Keith Lee video because he's a fucking moron. Love Chad Ochocinco. He loves to say stupid shit. He's just one of those dudes, man. He's just one of those guys that he thinks he can speak from his experience at all times without having to do research, and it'll come off as accurate. It's just not how it is. They had Chad Ochocinco on the Pivot podcast, and obviously he's more comfortable there. If you're unfamiliar, they all used to do it. They all used to be on that podcast that I mentioned before, I'm Athlete. They all used to be on the same podcast together. And then they kind of branched off and did their own things. Chad Ochocinco does a show with Shannon Sharp, who, by the way, killing the game. Listen to Nightcap one episode. There's some toxic masculinity shit that's in there on a pretty regular basis, but Shannon Sharp is from the Deep South. Grew up in a house that had a dirt floor, and he is now a millionaire multiple times over. So forgive me if he's kind of a dick. You know what I mean? He's not even kind of a dick. He just has like some real antiquated views on what relationships are supposed to be like. And he also like, like for a guy, he just never mind. He seems sexually closed-minded based off one of the episodes that I had that I listened to with Nightcap. You should definitely check it out. Chad Ochocinco has gone through a flurry of things as a human being. You should check it out. You should check it out. You know what I mean? He's got a lot to say. He's a funny guy. He's a funny guy. I actually like Chad a lot because for the most part, one, he's a big endorser of you can outwork a bad diet, which is really funny. But in the process of pointing out you can outwork a bad diet, he does bring to light how health studies have been bought and purchased in the past to endorse certain types of certain dietary choices and stuff like that to create a market for those dietary choices, which is really funny because really, I don't know if he does it on purpose, and that's it's a big bit that he's been doing because he's been saying it for years, but he eats McDonald's every day and he's swole and cut and lean and shit like that. And a lot of that is from the fact that one, Chad has been working out very hard vast majority of his life, and I don't know what his McDonald's order is every single day because it could be under his caloric count, and he could also be eating fruits and vegetables other than the McDonald's that we just don't see. But he does eat and drink McDonald's every day. I think he drinks coffee. I don't know if he drinks soda. But yeah, he's got like a 6-pack or whatever, and he lifts weights and everything like that. So, but yeah, Chad Johnson is a big advocate of everything in moderation for the most part, and I think that's really important, especially hearing it come from a NFL football player in a world where gorging yourself is kind of required to be an NFL offensive lineman, and it kind of sucks sometimes. So, but yeah, that's all I got about the Simone Bile situation. There are people who are being disingenuous on the internet. Surprise, surprise. The comments that Jonathan Owens made, kind of insane about men always being the catch. But then everything afterwards sounds like his relationship with Simone has changed his life drastically. The comments from Simone about Simone Biles' husband and Jonathan Owens' wife were interesting and basically refute. Like, there were people who were denying what she was saying on the show, but she said it in a way to stand up for her guy. Right? That's understandable. Necessary? I don't think so. If you're not humble enough as a dude to sit across and be married to the greatest gymnast of all time and accept that you're not going to become the greatest at your position ever, especially after all the things he has overcome to get to where he is now, and you're still like, I don't know if he actually is not able to be that humble because Simone jumped in to defend him, and obviously Simone's doing that out of love. But if you're so soft that you can't accept that your wife is a greater athlete than you've ever been or ever will be, I don't know what to tell you, bro. Yeah, anyway, just something to think about. Just some stuff to think about. The Pivot Podcast is taking a lot. I don't know how much of the heat they're taking on this one because Fred Taylor and Channing Crowder essentially laughed at Jonathan Owens the entire time he was making those comments. But kind of wild that Simone will marry a guy who would say something like that, and maybe he did mean it as a joke, and I just don't get his brand of humor. That's a possibility too. Let's talk about the Detroit Pistons. So the Detroit Pistons are very easily cruising towards the worst season in the history of the NBA, and people have been cracking jokes about them the entire time, right? Their only wins are against the other two teams that are doing really terribly in the NBA, and it's the Wizards and the Spurs, right? The lowest win total in the history of the NBA is 7 wins, I believe, from at the time the Charlotte Bobcats, and that was on a strike-shortened season. And this is actually giving me more, once again, the rise of ex-professional football players investing in podcasting and being a part of it has given me more perspective on how all this losing really affects people, because there's just a certain level of being a competitor that some people will never understand. And I'm not trying to say I understand at that level, right? Like, I'm obsessed with the sport that I play currently in quad ball, but I'm never going to be obsessed on the level of a professional athlete, right? Like, quad ball is not going to make me a millionaire, and it is thusly not going to justify and inspire me to put that kind of work and put that kind of effort into it. Now, I watch film, I work out, I try and eat healthy on a regular basis. I did drink an entire bottle of whiskey on Friday, but that's a story for another day. But for the most part, I try to do better, simply for the sake of my sport. Now, what's going on with the Detroit Pistons, and this could be, the Detroit Pistons are an organization that is very clearly not invested in trying to win basketball games. And for those of you who are still under the guise that every pro team in the league is trying to win every game that they play, I implore you to, actually watch sports for the first time in your life and stop listening to sports talk radio. No, I take that back. Stop listening to bad sports talk radio. The Detroit Pistons have not been interested in winning basketball games, I would dare say, in 8 years, bro. Their current situation is they have Cade Cunningham, who is supposed to be a generational level talent at the point guard position. He's had some injuries that have kind of held him back. And recently, even for the World Cup, there's been some hints that out of the team that went to the FIBA World Cup, Cade Cunningham, as a second-year player in the NBA, has a legit shot at making the Olympic team at the point guard position with his skill level and his ability. That's saying a lot, because what's coming up now is the Olympics in France. I say France because the basketball portion is not happening in Paris. Now, what's coming up is drastically important. He's going to have to compete against literally the best basketball players on the face of the planet. And Cade has based off the comments that were made in media, the movement that was made in terms of who he was playing with at the training camps and stuff like that, he has a legit chance of making Team USA, the main Team USA team that's going to compete at the Olympics for a gold medal. And that means that you are one of the elite. Whether you play a single second or not, if you're on Team USA basketball at any point, you are one of the best basketball players at your position in the world, right? If not the best. And the only guy that probably is better than you is also on the Team USA bench. But that's the level of talent that they have on that level of individual talent that they have on the team from Cade Cunningham. Now, what does that mean in the grand scheme of things? It means that there's a potential that this level of losing, have no idea what's going on in the locker room on a regular basis, but this level of losing, and a lot of other pro athletes have brought this up, this is the kind of shit that breaks people. This is the kind of stuff that breaks athletes, right? Because as far as we know, mentally holding, the Pistons not making no trades to win no games. By the time the trade deadline rolls around, they're more trying to get people out than in. And they've been trying to get people out for a long, long period of time. They are trying to go down the path that the Philadelphia 76ers went down. They're trying to draft elite level talents, because they don't want to pay big money for big talents. The biggest money I think they've spent in the last couple of years has been on Jeremy Grant, who is now with the Portland Trailblazers, if I'm not mistaken. Good for him. Jeremy escaped that one bad situation, and he's in a slightly less bad situation. But yeah, the Pistons, I just wonder, I see that happening, and it, as a guy who's been a career loser in sports, very rarely have ever been on a team that has a winning record. Losing takes a toll on you. It breaks you down. It makes you question your self-worth. It makes you question how much you really care about this kind of stuff. Because at a certain point, if you care too much, that means that all this hurts like on a magnification of 10. And some people can't deal with that, and I totally understand why. Also, you dance with the dangerous game of accepting losing, right? Like, you get to a point where it happens so often. Like, what is it? I say it on the show all the time. You tell somebody they're a bad person enough times, they believe they're a bad person, and they start being a bad person. But yeah, something to think about. I didn't have any deep thoughts on that. I just wanted to point out like all the dangerous avenues that you walk down when you're in a situation like the Detroit Pistons are in. And it's not just like, oh, they're making jokes about us on the internet. And at a certain point, they're going to stop making jokes and people are going to start getting really concerned. We'll see. NFL brain dump. Oh, man. We are an hour into the show and I haven't even talked about the NFL. I will do that right now. Holy crap, you guys totally heard that. Did this guy respond to me again? I don't want to talk to you, my guy. Some dude told me that I'm miserable because I pointed out how Darrell Bevell, who's the quarterback's coach for the Miami Dolphins, doesn't know what a do-rag is, and he's been working with black people for over a decade. And I think he's been an NFL quarterbacks coach for like 16 years. And he's worked with enough black people to have like apparently he's worked with enough black people that he's also simultaneously never asked a single black person what a do-rag is. And it's just kind of like, what kind of world do you live in? That means that he doesn't have black friends. That means that he doesn't talk to his black players on that kind of level, even though you guys are like kind of locked in with each other from the jump, right? Just something to think about, man. Like, I put that on Loose Thoughts. I tweeted that out, and I thought it was fucking weird. Like, I just can't. It was an incident. It wasn't an incident. It was a conversation being had in on the in-season Hard Knocks with the Miami Dolphins. They talked to Tua after he gets his braids put in, like during the bye week, and that is what the conversation turns to. And it is kind of crazy that a grown-ass man who's been coaching NFL players for literally decades has never asked himself not one time, what is that called and what does it do? So, yeah, just something to think about. NFL brain dump. The Saints played the Rams. So the Rams have been in like a recent turnaround, like major turnaround situation. I don't know how much people actually care. They're a playoff team now. Again, they look like the team that I saw when they beat the Seahawks in week 1. And some of that has to do with Matthew Stafford getting a lot healthier. I think also getting Cooper Kupp back has taken a lot of stress off of the offensive line to go out there and win every single rep, every single second. Apparently, they're cruising towards potentially playing the Dolphins in the first round. Crazy shit. Crazy how the NFL works out that way. But yeah, the Rams seems like, I'm not going to say the offensive line has gotten better. It feels like they're not completely just getting waylaid like I saw earlier in the season, which goes a long way in terms of getting like your really good quarterback an opportunity to go make some magic happen, right? That's like a real thing for people. Other stuff with the Rams. Oh, Kyren Williams being back has made a massive difference. Man. That makes a massive difference. Sorry, I'm looking at NFL highlights while I'm scrolling down right here real quick. Anyway, just something to think about. My friends. The Rams looking pretty good. Can't deny it at this point. It's just factually they have drastically improved, and a lot of that is some rookies hitting. Like they've got a rookie offensive lineman in Steve Avila who's up there, who's been doing pretty good. Kyren Williams, rookie. Puka Nacua balancing out their offense so that people can't key in on Cooper Kupp. And on top of that, he wins on different types of routes than Cooper Kupp does, right? Cooper is like crazy shifty. Puka is the zone killer. And he's looked pretty good, man. They got something going. They got something going, and I've been talking about it since week one. The Rams secondary without Jalen Ramsey, surprisingly very good. And they've continued to look pretty good. They've gotten a couple of key turnovers in the back half of the season so far, and it pays big dividends because they got the kind of offense that can take time off the clock or can straight up actually score utilizing those things. Just want to put that out there. Kyle Pitts just scored a touchdown, if that means anything to anyone. The Saints, by the way, they've drifted away. Well, not drifted. They finally got an offense that is not just throw the ball to Alvin Kamara, and they've been able to win games. So let me double check this because their point total has gone up drastically since, Derek Carr's been playing hurt almost all season. He had the AC joint injury. Remember that when his AC joint got messed up when Alvin Kamara came back, and so they just threw the ball 13 times to Alvin Kamara in a single game, and nobody really said anything. So, but yeah, man, the Saints their average points per game has gone up drastically throughout the course of this season. They beat, by the way, forgot about that. They beat the Patriots 34-0 at one point. But yeah, they're averaging 24 points a game. Again, like they're averaging their last 3 games. They have scored 3 touchdowns and a field goal, which is the sign of a good offense, believe it or not. And they do it in weird ways, too. Like, they've got some defensive touchdowns, but the Saints look like a more complete team than some of these other playoff teams that are out there competing. And a lot of it is due to Derek Carr being able to sling that thing down the field. They got 3 wide receivers they can actually depend upon. Chris Olave is looking like the guy that we were promised out of Ohio State. Once again, another banger of a wide receiver out of Ohio State. What do these guys not do? But yeah, that plus Alvin Kamara being back and their defense being nasty as shit. They haven't given up. When's the last time they gave up 20 points? So they gave up 30 to the Rams, and then before that, they surrendered 33 to the Lions. In a divisional matchup, they gave up 24. Like they've been cruising pretty good. They had that long streak of not giving up more. What is it, like 10 points or some shit like that? They hadn't given up 10 points in like a year and a half or something. But yeah, that's over now. But the Saints actually look like a legitimate playoff team. They may not play a fun brand of football, as some people would like to say, but they play balanced football, and it goes a long way because it takes pressure off individual people to go out there and be the hero of the day. And it's good when you don't have to depend on Alvin Kamara to catch 17 passes for you to be successful, right? But yeah, they're slowly but surely, they've been on this path all season, and it just comes down to like what the coaching decisions are going to look like for the most part. The Bengals played the Steelers. The Steelers are patting themselves on the back because they beat a backup quarterback. The more shocking thing that came out of this is the Bengals, just their defensive presence was just not there. If you know anything about the Bengals this whole season and really the last like 4 years, all the success that Joe Burrow's had is squarely on the fact that Joe Burrow is very good at football and their defense has gotten better. Over the course, since Joe Burrow has gotten there, their defense has improved at the same rate that Joe Burrow has gotten better as a quarterback. And that is what makes them one of the elite Super Bowl contenders. So that's what happened. That was what the shocking part of Thursday night football was overall, man. That Pittsburgh went out there and threw up 34 points with Kool-Aid lips, Mason Rudolph. By the way, in case you're wondering, yes, I do believe he did call Myles Garrett the N-word when he sacked him. So fucking fight me, I don't care. Whatever. Anyway, it's also very funny that the guy who came and defended him first after Myles Garrett hit him with the helmet was definitely Mike Pouncey, who, if you know anything about Mike and Maurice Pouncey, they are... Look up their Twitter now, and it'll tell you everything you need to know when that situation occurred. Whatever. Buffalo played the Chargers and almost lost. So the Buffalo Bills... The journey has been weird all season, right? It feels like the offense has been there all year, even though there's been times where the offense has not actually shown up for them. I'll be honest with you. What has been the biggest issue is the turnovers putting a defense that was still trying to figure itself out in a bad spot. Christian Bernard is trying to take who's trying to fill a massive gap at the linebacker position for Matt Milano. The Bills they were filled with injuries at the defensive back position on a pretty regular basis. And you can tell when they have all their guys healthy, because that's the games where they're like, oh, we gave up 7 points to the third best offense in the NFL. Those are the games when they're fully healthy, but they're rarely fully healthy on the defensive side of the ball. We'll point this out. It's really cool to see the pass rush kind of pick up the slack. They got Von Miller out there. Von Miller has not had like a super spectacular season or anything like that, but Von Miller combined with Greg Rousseau, combined with Ed Oliver and a couple of other guys, and Leonard Floyd, they've been killing it. They've been doing great. I'm up front. I feel like they've made massive strides in taking pressure off the defensive backs. Also, Rasul Douglas pulling up and being a high-quality corner after they lose Tre'Davious White again for the season off of an Achilles tear. Always tough, man. Always tough. But yeah, it's pretty dope, man. The Bills feel like they started putting it together towards the back half of the season. The interesting part has been they are one of many teams that has apparently rediscovered the idea of running the football, and I find that hilarious. So I'm just going to go down the list of teams that are in the NFL that I feel like lean on their run game drastically. The Bengals, since Joe Burrow's gone down, Joe Mixon's total touchdowns have like skyrocketed, and his carries have skyrocketed, and that's correlated to their victories. The Saints, dependent upon Alvin Kamara to be successful. The Rams, we just talked about this, Kyron Williams. Buffalo Bills, James Cook is literally second in the NFL in rushing yards, and that's not by mistake. Los Angeles, whether you believe it or not, they're heavily dependent upon Austin Eckler. The Colts, dependent upon the fact that they have 2 number 1 running backs in Zach Moss and Jonathan Taylor. The Atlanta Falcons, people want them to run the ball, and they won't do it for some reason. Seattle, dependent upon Kenneth Walker to go out there and be massively successful. Tennessee, the king, Derrick Henry. The Detroit Lions. Have you guys heard about how David Montgomery and Jahmyr Gibbs are the best running back duo in the NFL? Has anybody heard that lately? Or they've just been, no, nobody's heard that. It's so crazy how successful they are by just running the ball. Green Bay Packers, they forgot that they could run the ball the first half of the season, and then when they started getting the carries to Aaron Jones and A.J. Dillon, all of a sudden the offense starts to unlock. Who would have thought? The Carolina Panthers, for as bad as they've been all season in terms of win-loss record, the thing that has kept them in their games is the fact that they got Chuba Hubbard and Miles Sanders out there. The Cleveland Browns, ladies and gentlemen, Jerome Ford, who is not getting enough credit for stepping in and filling in for Nick Chubb, and you can barely tell the fucking difference. Oh, by the way, the Houston Texans, Devin Singletary. It's a huge... Devin Singletary carried the Texans to a win last week versus the Tennessee Titans. Jacksonville, everybody's talking about how Trevor Lawrence sucks. You know what they're not talking about? How Travis Etienne has been carrying the squad. Every time that there's been struggles with the pass game where they can't magically find Calvin Ridley open, which he typically is, they've got your guy out there carrying the load. Mr. Duckfoot himself, Travis Etienne. But yeah, just a couple of examples of how insanely valuable the running game is to more than half the teams in the NFL. Yet for some reason we've allowed ourselves to believe that running back doesn't matter anymore. And there's 2 different ways. Some people believe that running the ball doesn't matter anymore, and that's crazy. There's other people who believe that there's so many good running backs that it devalues the position, right? I will say this, there's a lot of guys who can run the ball very effectively because typically your running backs are in the top 5% of your athletes on your roster, so typically they're going to be pretty good at their spot or whatever. But yeah, no big deal. Just saw a past year where people try to pretend that they could exist without having to run the ball, that there was going to be no problems with that situation, and it was kind of whack. It's because I think if you're a real football fan, you know how good NFL running backs are. And to see them kind of get disrespected like that money-wise, and know that money is real, like that money that Daniel Jones got for Saquon Barkley running so well is real money, is always tough to handle. For me personally, because it comes off like it's a certain thing. It comes off like it's a thing. And you know what? It comes off like it's the thing. It comes off like it's the thing. The Colts, so far this season, Honestly, man, with everything that was going down, we saw Anthony Richardson early 4 weeks of the season. Definitely thought the Colts were going to run away with the AFC South. Their lockdown defense plus the fact that Anthony Richardson looked like he was the real deal, major problem. Major problem because that guy's coming back next year. So the AFC South is going to be crazy because if Will Levis can stick around and can really develop and get to that point where you see him be a competent starter like we've seen before. By the way, got to give credit to Will Levis. Most of what he has done, and I say this as a person who doesn't necessarily, I understand some X's and O's in football. I played D1 football, was not very good. I watch football every single weekend. I watch like breakdowns of like how plays work and schemes. I've watched football for a long time. I've played sports a long time in my life, but I feel like when I see Will Levis throw the ball, there's a good chunk of his passes where he just has faith in his teammates. And a lot of these other backup and younger quarterbacks, a billion and one people have said this, and I mean this. There's just so many people who are so concerned with messing up, they won't allow themselves to ball out. Will Levis comes off like a dude who's more concerned about balling out than messing up. And it shows in his past decisions. He has faith that DeAndre Hopkins is going to come down with it. He's finding ways to get the ball to dudes that a lot of people didn't think were very good, right? And part of what happened with Ryan Tannehill is he used to get crazy with the throws. And it slowly teetered out, right? He's gotten more conservative as time has gone on. And Will Levis seems like he's willing to go out there and sling that thing. By the way, crazy stat that I saw, today is the first day that Mike Vrabel is going to be coaching completely eliminated from the playoff hunt for the first time in his 6 years as the head coach of the Tennessee Titans. Kind of wild. But yeah, the Colts, man, they look good. Colts look like a playoff team. I can't even lie. I always value defense, I think more so than a lot of other people do, and that's part of the problem. Like last week when they had the whole DeMonte KZ situation where he hit Michael Pittman Jr., I was like, that throw is on. The reason Michael Pittman got hurt is because of Gardner Minshew, not because of DeMonte KZ, believe it or not. And of course, that concept is really difficult for like non-sports or non-football people to understand. But putting your teammate in a position to where you know they're going to do whatever it takes to come down with the ball, and then putting the ball in the dangerous spot where like he has to dive like that, and then the safety going in there to make a hit like a normal hit, and it ends up with your guy getting hurt is like your fault. It is 100% your fault. Anyway, and I know people hate to hear that kind of stuff like that, but yeah, I thought the suspension of KZ was kind of wild because it was very clear that there's a diving offensive player gaining yards, and he just tried to stop him from gaining yards. I don't feel like because the first point of contact from where KZ was had to be Michael Pittman Jr.'s head because of the position that he put his body in. So it's just, once again, defensive players are responsible for offensive players' safety, and that is absurd. Especially for a league that constantly has dudes talking about how they're grown-ass men. So, moving on, the Atlanta Falcons, still in the playoff hunt somehow. Don't know how we've worked our way into that one. Shout out to the NFC South for once again being a truly football hell run by pure chaos. The god of chaos himself, Jameis Winston, operates from his home base of New Orleans, Louisiana, apparently. So, but yeah, man. It's been tough to watch. I've watched every single Falcons game this season. They've a lot of going back and forth. A lot of it's been going back. A lot of it's been going back and forth between quarterbacks in the worst way possible. Taylor Heineke, I thought, was going to be the solution to a lot of these issues, just because Taylor has shown the willingness to throw the ball down the field. He did early on, and he slowly kind of like reined himself in. Have to imagine that that's some of the coaching that he's getting overall. But the whole like not finding ways to get the ball to your best playmakers, like Drake London blowing up one time every month or one time a month, blowing up and looking like he's a top 10 wide receiver in the NFL, and then all of a sudden disappearing the following week is always a little perturbing, because that comes off like it's coaching sometimes. It seems like there's a lot of players who are going out there and making plays. Things just got it's getting bad, but their defense, and like I said before, this is crazy to talk about, This is probably the best Falcons defense they've had in almost a decade, my guy. It feels like the Falcons may be a quarterback away from being a real contender. Not just a playoff team, a contender. I just saw a tweet where Jordan Brooks is limping off the field. So, tough. Bad day for me. Speaking of Seattle, let's talk about them. Can't defend the run. And been surprised by how good Drew Lock has been the last couple of weeks, man. I like seeing the success from Drew Lock. Obviously, I'm a Seattle Seahawks fan. If you're not familiar with if you're unfamiliar with my game, I'm a big Seattle Seahawks fan. But yeah, man, it's been interesting to see them operate. Their pass defense has been pretty good. Their run defense has been a struggle. A lot of that is centered around, and I hate to say it, the linebacker position has been struggling every once in a while. But when they get into a groove, they get into a groove, man. And they really, we've been seeing a lot of injuries. And I say we in terms of like the football world at large, a lot of injuries along the defensive line for the Seahawks, and I think that's kind of affected the pass rush overall. Adafe Moe, that guy is the real deal. But they lost their number one pass rusher in Nwosu early on in the season, so hopefully Madafe is going to do really good when Nwosu comes back next season, and they're going to have a pass rush that they've been looking for the past couple of years. You know what I mean? Jordan Brooks will be another year better, another year older. Don't know what the future holds for Bobby, which is really sad for me personally, because Bobby's like my favorite football player in the NFL. But the secondary continues to do really. I mean, the secondary continues to turn up, man. Like the whole like finding Devin Witherspoon a season after you get Kobe Bryant and Tariq Woolen, crazy, bro. Crazy amounts of skill. Also, let's talk about the elephant in the room. I said it in week 1, and I'll say it again. Julian Love, taking Julian Love off the field to put Jamal Adams in is not any longer a possible justification. There is no way to justify having Julian Love on the field, not having Julian Love on the field, and having Jamal Adams on the side on the field in place of him. There's just no way to do it. Run defense, Julian Love is spectacular. Jamal Adams still going out there blitzing and stuff like that. It doesn't feel like the success rate is there when the blitzes are coming, but we've gotten to this point now where Julian does so many things what looks to be better than Jamal Adams within the Seattle Seahawks system, that putting Jamal Adams on the field is putting your second best safety out there, or your third best safety, because Quandre Diggs is not coming off the field, right? It's like putting your second best safety or your third best safety out there, and you can't justify that. This is the real world. But what a problem to have for the Seahawks, right? I mean, like, we have too many good safeties. Oh no. But yeah, for the most part, man, it's been a roller coaster because of the whole Drew Lock situation. People have been kind of speculating that maybe Geno Smith is not as hurt. There've been a lot of speculation about how this past week Drew Lock was the starting quarterback, despite the fact that Geno Smith was available to play. I don't know about that. I guess we'll find out. But the Seahawks are still in the mix, man. A couple weeks left in the season, and the Seahawks obviously have to be a wild card contender because of the 49ers. But the way they played against the 49ers was, it's kind of what I expected overall. But Seattle has once again stepped up in a multitude of ways. When the run game is going, the pass game is there, man. We've seen Jackson Smith and Jigba slowly be on an upward trend in terms of looking like an Ohio State wide receiver who got drafted into the NFL, meaning that he is amazing, right? Going to another team, Tennessee. By the way, in case you haven't figured it out, I'm not giving predictions. I'm going through every team in the NFL based off today's schedule and talking about them. I already talked about the Tennessee Titans. The defensive presence actually kind of surprising for me, man. The defense, I feel like, has held up vast majority of the season, and some of it is due to pass rush, because the stuff that they're getting. The Jeffrey Simmons Arden Key situation is actually fucking crazy. It's worked out perfectly, and what is it? Tart, I think, is the other guy, the number 90 for Tennessee up front. They get pressure in the worst places to get pressure. The Tennessee Titans defense does, and it's just it's interesting to watch them play now, because at first they were like real constricted about like where they would throw the ball to, and then the second that Will Levis shows up, it's almost like every single receiver is a threat to catch the ball every single play. Seeing some improvement from last season from Treylon Burke, even after the injury that he just came back from. It seems like Will Levis is finding ways to get him the ball. He may not be the Deebo Samuels that people were trying to describe him as he was coming out of Arkansas, but I like what I'm seeing, man. I feel like he looks better than he did last year, and that's a step forward. The Detroit Pistons, the team that makes me sad. Actually, the Detroit Lions are taking on the Minnesota Vikings today, but we'll talk about Detroit. Detroit, we said it week one, baby. We said it week one, and we were right. They're a playoff team. They look for real. They're probably, like I said before, they're probably the best team you've seen on Hard Knocks in the last couple of, last like 5 or 6 seasons. They're probably the best team you've seen on Hard Knocks, because the Buccaneers were on there a couple years ago, and they went from Jameis to Tom Brady, which means like the following season afterwards they won the Super Bowl. But the Lions were on there last season as the preseason Hard Knocks team, got a lot of people interested in them, got a lot of people focusing on them, and they've taken a massive step forward. They are the hunted. They are no longer the hunter in their division. And some of that is due to the fact that, Kirk Cousins is hurt. Kirk Cousins was on track to have one of his best seasons ever at the quarterback position. So he went from that embarrassing ending to a playoff game last year to taking another step forward as a football player, and taking another step forward in the offense that they were running with KLC. Obviously, the way that the season ended with the Achilles being torn and stuff like that has probably brought a lot of questions about whether or not the Minnesota Vikings are in competition for Kirk Cousins, right? Because Kirk can go to a lot of teams in the NFL, and they instantaneously can go from to a playoff level team. There's a couple of teams that he can go to that makes them a Super Bowl contender, and it's not because Kirk Cousins is going to go out there and be the hero that they need. It's because their team is so ridiculously stacked. They need somebody to go out there and cook, and Kirk can cook at times, right? That's a real situation. I'm talking about the 49ers, obviously. But yeah, something to think about, man. It's the Detroit Lions have been looking good. Jared Goff is getting a good mix. He's got a good mix of wide receiver at the wide receiver position. Amon-Ra St. Brown doing his thing is vastly important. He's not just a one-dimensional play, pure wide receiver type of guy. He's a dude that moves all over the field, and it creates problems for defenses in terms of covering him. Then now they've got the speedster and Jamison Williams to extend the ball down the field, plus the fact that they have a run game that when their pass offense just isn't there, whether it be because of the pass protection, because I think they're like middle of the pack in terms of pass protection, but they're like elite at run blocking, which obviously it's a symbiotic relationship between offensive line and running back, because there are some running backs that overcome their offensive line situation, the New York Jets, and there are players who are clearly working really well with what their offensive line does up front, right? Saquon Barkley has been running behind probably the worst offensive line in the NFL, or somewhere close to that, and he's finding ways to be successful. So, yeah, something to think about. The Vikings, what a journey. What a time. From Kirk Cousins to Josh Dobbs to Nick Mullins out there, who, by the way, just saw on Twitter, he apparently had some hilarious turnover. I can't wait to go check that out. But yeah, man, it has been a journey. One thing that has remained consistent, one of the few things that have remained consistent in the journey, their defense is cooking, man. I've seen articles, I've listened to podcasts about this, about how they invented a defense that's never been run before. Like a defense that's not commonly run. And I think what it is they run like stuff that looks like cover 3, and then one of the 3 safeties is just doing the playmaker role, which, if you're unfamiliar, it's the thing that they used to do with Deion Sanders, where like Deion would be lined up in front of a wide receiver, but if the ball goes on that half of the field, he's like got all the carte blanche to go out there and get that fucking ball. And I think they're doing that with Cameron Bynum. Right, Cameron Bynum and a couple other guys too. So it's actually kind of cool to see them be able to be successful despite major injuries. Like Akeem Hicks got hurt. Right. It's Akeem Hicks, the middle linebacker for the Vikings. Hold on. I gotta look this up real quick. Hicks, Vikings. What a search. Hicks, Vikings linebacker. Jordan Hicks. Jordan Hicks gets hurt. He's out for the season. And for a lot of teams, when your number one middle linebacker goes down, it's big problems. Big problems, right? So they've overcome that and still look pretty good. They've been competitive in a lot of games that they really shouldn't have been, let's be real. Which is almost all of them. Like, almost all the games they've been in this season, they shouldn't have been competitive in. But, yeah, that's what we got going on here for the Minnesota Vikings. For a team that, I mean, it's kind of been falling apart all season. They really struggled finding the run game early on. And now, Kirk Cousins going down really put him in a hole. And then finding Josh Dobbs to go out there and win him a couple games and be competent enough. By the way, just like every other backup quarterback in the NFL, it's only a matter of time before the every backup QB's got a timer, right? Like, they can go out there for a certain number of games and make it happen. And once you get past that number of games, they start looking like what we all think a regular person being in the NFL would look like, which is actually not true. That's what the interesting part about this whole thing is, man. Josh Dobbs' whole season unraveling towards the end has been tough to watch. Also, like to point out the horrible situation that he is in. Backup quarterback gets traded to a team mid-season, has to learn a whole new offense. He says he knew all the plays and stuff like that. That I believe, but knowing the plays and knowing where to put the ball, bunch of different ways, right? He starts the season, he doesn't even know that he's going to be the starter for the Cardinals until like way late into camp kind of deal, and he's just been on a roller coaster. And it was only a matter of time before it kind of unraveled itself, but how he responded to all that adversity in a single season is ridiculously admirable. So, but yeah, the Washington Commanders, their season's over, right? Eric Bieniemy probably going to be the head coach for the team next season. Just off the fact that it doesn't look like Ron Rivera's coming back. They've already fired Jack Del Rio. Their pressure numbers have skyrocketed since Jack Del Rio got fired. I don't know if that's like a correlation or it's just the adjustment after the trade. Like, losing Montez Sweat is like a massive gap in terms of pressure making for a team, and it seems like it took them a couple weeks to get back on track with that. But yeah, one thing I've also noticed, whoever is out there playing, look, Sam Howell, don't know what the deal is, right? We saw Jacoby Brissett go out there last week versus the Rams, absolutely cook, almost scored 4 touchdowns in less than 9 minutes. Insane concept, right? He was one onside kick away from getting the ball right back, and the Jacoby Brissett phenomenon continues, essentially, because he played really well for the Browns last season too. So not a surprise that he went out there and did that versus the Rams, just surprising that he did it in less than 9 minutes to almost pull that one off. But yeah, Washington has been interesting because last week seems like the sign you're giving up on Sam Howell. Don't know if that's necessarily true. Maybe just Jacoby Brissett runs Eric Bieniemy's offense a little bit better, and he was tired of dealing with a young quarterback. That happens, right? Especially when you're like not Patrick Mahomes. When you're not Patrick Mahomes, I'm sure Eric Bieniemy gets really pissed off very quickly with what you do. But facts are, there's going to be a lot of change coming towards the Commanders next season. Have to wonder, if you're a free agent, do you even want to come back to Washington if you have offers other places? Because they are clearly in a time of turmoil, but they're also in a time of spending with the new owner of the team, right? The new team owner coming in there, trying to make big waves very, very early on. And like I said before, I'd be surprised if Eric Bieniemy's not the head coach next season. So, there's that. Eric Bieniemy also joining the list of guys who look drastically different when they don't have a ridiculously talented quarterback running their offense, right? Brian Daboll being away from Brian Daboll having like Tommy DeVito and Daniel Jones obviously has elevated like what they do as a team. Like, Sam Howell clearly is playing better than he was last season, but the extra that comes with being like a ridiculously soon-to-be legendary quarterback in Josh Allen and Patrick Mahomes, right? Drastic differences in terms of how those offenses are run. The Jets, they play football sometimes. But yeah, like bro, Get out of here. So we talk about the Jets. Breece Hall carrying the team. Has been all season. Zach Wilson had a dead cat bounce versus the Texans. Big thing to talk about the Texans is I can't tell if they're playing up to competition or playing down to competition. Don't know which one it is. It's very interesting. That's all I'll say. Don't know which one it is because the defense for the Jets is one of the best defenses the Texans have played all season, but the offense is what really undid them in that game. And that's when they had C.J. Stroud before he got concussed. So it's been interesting to watch overall how long the Jets defense has kept their resolve to be a dominant force while the offense is essentially giving them 3 and out after 3 and out after 3 and out after 3 and out. Their conditioning must be insane. The Green Bay Packers another roller coaster of a team, which is good to see because now there's major questions about what's up with this Jordan Love guy. He's playing pretty good. And he plays like at an elite level sometimes. But then there's other times where he plays like he's never seen a football a day in his life. Interesting. By the way, last time we talked about the Packers, we made this joke. We're like, hey, man, if Jordan Love can play like he plays in the fourth quarter for like 4 quarters, he'll win. Every game that they play. They are a playoff contender technically because things are getting kind of weird for them and everything like that right now. Obviously, a lot of things are not in their control because of their record. Things were in their control. Now they're not. They're playing Carolina. Have to imagine that, they're going to get that win for the most part just off the quality of the Packers defense, which, by the way, up and down all season. Kind of weird. But, yeah, the Packers offense, man, it felt like they finally caught their stride for about 4 or 5 weeks, and then it's kind of derailed itself. Thanks to the Chicago Bears of all teams. Who would have thought? But yeah, the Carolina Panthers, another team here. I'd like to point out, I more so believe in Bryce a lot, actually. Who I don't believe in is pretty much everybody else around him. So the situation has been interesting to watch. And with the Panthers, the wide receiver stuff is really frustrating. So if you don't know, the top 5 wide receivers for the Panthers is 1 wide receiver and 4 other people who don't play wide receiver. So Hayden Hurst, their tight end, both of their running backs are 2nd and 4th, and Hayden Hurst is like 3rd. And the 5th best wide receiver there's one other wide receiver. The 5th best receiver on the team in terms of like yards and catches and stuff like that is Jonathan Mingo, who's the rookie. So pretty much everybody outside of Adam Thielen and Jonathan Mingo, have to imagine all those guys they're going to move on from a good chunk of those fellas. You know what I mean? Terrence Marshall Jr., so far, big disappointment in the NFL. Really tough to see because he's got a lot of talent, but he's gotten healthy scratched like 5 times this season. It's been tough to watch, especially for a person who drafted him in a pretty deep sleeper league. So thought I saw something, did not see it, and apparently the Panthers don't see it either. But then again, based off what I've seen from the Panthers coaching-wise, wouldn't necessarily trust their talent assessment. But yeah, that's what it's really been like. There's been times where like Bryce Young looks like a high-quality quarterback, like a high-quality young quarterback, and there's been times where you look at him and you're like, the situation is pretty bad. Plus, there's something about their offense where Adam Thielen is always open. Very weird. Don't know if that's a skill from Adam Thielen. It probably is. But at the same time, like, you have to wonder, like, is it the effect of the offense on Bryce Young's eyes? Or is it Bryce Young's eyes only looking at one person for the vast majority of the game? And if that's the case, that's really concerning. So, but yeah, the Browns play the Texans. Browns, crazy stuff, man. The Browns finally decided they wanted to be elite. They went and got Joe Flacco. That's a massive boost if you are an offensive player on that team. Joe Flacco is a big fan of sling that thing, and he can still sling it. Some of the dimes he threw to Amari Cooper last week was not surprising because it is, in fact, Joe Flacco. Ladies and gentlemen, the Joe Flacco. But yeah, it's been wild to watch how successful he's been so early on, but not surprising me. Everybody in the group chat, I've been talking about it in the group chat for way longer than everybody else, but I was just kind of like, I mean, Joe Flacco and Jacoby Brissett both played really well last season for their situations, and it's really weird that Joe Flacco's not on the team. And then when I hear he's going on the Browns, I'm like, oh, it's a done deal, baby. They're going to the playoffs. Yeah, like they got a guy who's not going to fuck up the game for him, and they've got like the best defense in the NFL, combined with the fact that they can actually run the ball. Yeah. By the way, are we going to start talking about it yet? How they going to get out of this Deshaun Watson contract? Drop it in the comments. Let me know. Also, Kevin Stefanski, Coach of the Year. Anyone mind Coach of the Year? Kevin Stefanski, 4 quarterbacks, winning record, number 1 defense in the NFL. Just something to think about. The Texans, who probably have who's going to actually end up being the Coach of the Year, and DeMeco Ryans. So yeah, DeMeco has done the thing. Don't know if anybody else noticed this. The linebackers, I don't know if DeMeco's in charge of like finding free agent linebackers or anything like that, but linebacker position looking strong for the Texans this year. Also like the fact that they're constantly filling the box up, and they'll have like 3 linebackers and a DB out there, and they'll have all 4 of them lined up right next to each other, almost shoulder to shoulder, but they're, D-line's on the ball, and then the linebackers are like 6 yards off, right? And they got a DB who's 6 yards off with them, which allows them to run press coverage over somebody who could be potentially running a crossing route. And it also makes the wide receiver declare early which direction their route is going to go with Jalen Petrie down there, and gives help to the safety as to who they're going to be covering. It's pretty cool. I like seeing it. I think it's pretty effective, especially early on in plays when you got quarterbacks who are not the best at reading plays early on and need more time for it to develop. It buys more time for the pass rush to get there, which it kind of has been a little bit. My precious boy Will Anderson has been all I've ever wanted. He's not playing today, I don't think, though. So, big bummer. Cleveland, Houston, looking like 2 playoff teams. I can't even lie, man. Jacksonville, Tampa Bay. Look, man, I'm going to be honest with you. Tampa Bay and Jacksonville are actually theoretically on the same level. If you look at Tampa Bay is the positive version of Jacksonville, if that makes any sense. Tampa Bay got a quarterback that they kind of have a little bit of faith in, right? Every other position got a lot of really talented players at it, right? Especially on the defensive side of the ball. They can't run the ball, which is the polar opposite of what the Jacksonville Jaguars have. By the way, we don't talk about that enough, how like Tampa Bay literally cannot run the football. It's crazy. But they have like one of the best pass protection grades in the NFL. Baker, once again, remember that one time? You remember when that one time that Baker Mayfield got the Browns to the playoffs for the first time in like 20 years, and then they thought they were too good for him? Interesting. But yeah, Jacksonville at Tampa Bay this week. But Jacksonville's been kind of like all over the place, man. Thing that's been consistent, defensive presence has been pretty on point, especially considering I don't think I know more than the name of one defensive back for the Jacksonville Jaguars. And the only one I know is Andre Sisco because of what happened last year when Urban Meyer was the coach. 2 years ago when Urban Meyer was the coach. And they asked him about, like, hey, so what do you think about Andre Sisco playing? They're like, yeah, he played pretty well today. And then the reporter was like, Andre Sisco did not play today. And then Urban Meyer was like, you trying to set me up? Anyway, I just thought that was funny. But yeah, man, I feel like, the wins that they got early on in the season are really carrying them in the back end of this one. Let's be real. Don't buy into the hype about Trevor Lawrence sucks as a quarterback. I saw how Trevor Lawrence played last year in a playoff game versus the Chargers of all teams or whatever. But facts are, man, he's going through some changes, that's for sure. The injuries definitely affected him drastically. Like to say this, really weird. Doug Peterson's offense looks exactly the same as it did when he was the Eagles head coach. Better hope it has different results if you are a Jacksonville Jaguars fan. Arizona at Chicago. Two teams that are having bad seasons, but a lot of positivity in the room. I don't know. So I got a friend. He's been on the show before, Joe George, and we had a conversation. I was like, hey man, so like, what's the deal? You should just get Maserati Marv. And he was just like, I don't know. I don't know to keep like he doesn't know like if he thinks the Bears should keep Justin and get Caleb and then get Maserati Marv. And I'm like, you can get Maserati Marv with DJ Moore and Cole Kmet, and y'all are good. You got 3 high quality pass catching dudes on offense that in theory is gonna get better because Justin Fields will have a whole year in the offense, right? Theoretically, you also won't get hurt for like 5 games with a broken thumb, but who knows? As time goes on, you got a chance to stabilize the ship here right now, and then you can focus on what you need to really focus on, and that's getting better pass rushers. They went out there, got Montez Sweat, right? They get a linebacker. Of course, you're not going to be able to draft a guy who's like at the same level as Roquan Smith. Like, come on, let's be real. Roquan Smith is probably the best linebacker in the NFL this season, and if he's not number 1, he's number 2, right? You don't have to do that. You can just get more pass rushers and more linebackers up front, and you're good. Like I don't feel like they're that far off. Obviously, they need better pass protection up front, which can go a long way, especially when you deal with a quarterback like Justin Fields. But the whole like go for quarterback situation is obviously the easy thing to go for most people because there are some benefits to finding a superstar level quarterback, especially if you introduce them into a type of offense. Or if you introduce them into a healthy environment, which guess what? The Chicago Bears organization has never been healthy for any quarterback ever. It's just facts. Arizona's on the uptick, man. The defense looking pretty stout. Can't lie. Very shocking how good the defense has played this season overall. They've been getting pressure from the most valuable points and that's like up the middle, right? What has been the biggest struggle, and I think this has got to be the point of emphasis for them during the draft, and it's like focusing on wide receiver, right? Losing D-Hop did a major damage to pass catching situations. I still believe in Kyler Murray. The question is one, Paris Johnson is actually working out for them, Ohio State offensive lineman, actually working out for them, and it's kind of cool. Very rarely do you see a dude step in to be left tackle at the NFL level and he looks like he's supposed to be there instantaneously? Kind of crazy, right? But yeah, Arizona does not feel like they're that far off from being back to being a playoff contender, especially now that they have Kyler back. The question starts to become like they need to find more wide receivers to be able to go out there and make extra plays, right? I don't have any questions about either one of these. So from the Chicago Bears or the Arizona Cardinals, I don't feel like this is one of those situations like this head coach sucks and they need to go. I've seen some stuff like that on the internet about Chicago's coach and Eberflus, and I don't think that. I don't think that's the move. That's just me though. Dallas at Miami is happening today. That's happening Monday or Sunday. Actually, later today. That game's going to be a lot of fun. Because it's 2 teams that have been on fraud watch vast majority of the year. So this is the worst part. So I actually talked to some hockey fans a couple of weeks ago about the Boston Bruins. There we go. I talked to them about the Boston Bruins. If you guys don't know, and I totally get, we're an hour and 40 deep into a Loose Thoughts podcast, and I'm now connecting hockey to football. But the Boston Bruins last year had the greatest regular season in the history of hockey. I think they lost like 8 games, and it turns out they lost 8 games overall. They got to the playoffs, and the team they played in the first round is the Florida Panthers, who were having their second or best season ever last year as well. And 2 of the 8 losses that the Bruins had were to the Florida Panthers. And then they got swept by the Panthers in the first round, thus hence losing the greatest regular season in the history of the NHL in terms of like overall record. And I talked to these fans, and I was like, oh, man, it's tough being those guys. And they're like, yeah, coming off of a season like that. And I'm like, no, it's because now the regular season doesn't matter anymore. Like, you could have another great regular season, and all they'll be talking about is how good are you going to do in the playoffs. They'll never let you enjoy having a good regular season. That's the wild part. The same thing with the Dallas Cowboys. Like the Cowboys the last couple of years, for as much as we talk about how the Cowboys haven't won the Super Bowl in 30 years, I think it's 33 now. Anyway, make sure you keep that. Make sure all your Cowboys fans, this is their time of year, guys. This is their time of year where they're gonna start getting a little bit more. They're gonna get a little bit more jumpy. Like you start talking about the P word, the playoffs, and they're just gonna get a little bit more twitchy. You know, look out for your guys. Look out for your bros, your sisters. Look out for your theys in your life that are Cowboys fans, because they're not doing all right. Because everything that we're saying out loud, they're thinking in their head, and they've been thinking about it since last summer. Let's be real. Let's be real, ladies and gentlemen. They are struggling. And I feel like it's our personal job to make it as bad as possible. So make sure you keep bringing up all the horrible things that are happening. Anytime they get any kind of win, make sure you remind them it doesn't matter how good your wins are, because you're the Dallas Cowboys. You're the Cowboys. You're America's team. We're judging ourselves off winning regular season games, or are we judging ourselves off winning the Super Bowl? Come on. Come on. Be real. Make sure you do that to every Dallas Cowboys fan in your life to make their life a living hell. For me personally, as a Texans and Seahawks fan, please do it, please. But yeah, Dallas's look, you know, man, this whole talk about Dak Prescott being the MVP is the epitome of the MVP has now become a quarterback award, because there's two people who are clearly having a much better season that is more impactful for their teams than Dak Prescott, and it is, of course, Tyreek Hill and Christian McCaffrey, right? Those two guys are far ahead, without question, having a better season that is more impactful to their team than Dak Prescott. And not to say that Dak Prescott's not having a good year. This is one of his best years ever, and he's throwing the ball deeper down the field than he ever has before, slaying that thing. Anyway, we also know what their Achilles heel is, right? They cannot win on the road, and the South Beach flu may be kicking in a little bit later on today. We'll see. But Miami, man, one of the more another team on fraud watch, if you will, mainly because they haven't beaten a team with a winning record all season. So if there was ever a time to talk about the concept of eating the trash, if you don't know what that is, it is a team that beats the shit out of teams that suck and tries to prop themselves up like they're a team that's won important games, right? They eat the trash, right? And it's food, but it's easy food to access because it is in fact trash, right? Nobody's competing for it. But yeah, a lot of questions up in the air. I picked the Miami Dolphins to win the Super Bowl. They're going to be a playoff team. They've got the Bills on the ropes, and last night would have been the death nail in their coffin if they had lost that game to the Chargers. So the Dolphins, they've been cooking, man. I like a lot of what I've been seeing, and also, like we talked about on the show, Jalen Ramsey came back, and all of a sudden their defense took an even bigger step forward. Bradley Chubb has been slowly but surely kind of creeping upward in the right direction. Losing Jalen Phillips is massive for them overall, because we saw what Bradley Chubb looked like when they were still in the process of figuring out that Alex Van Ginkel was probably the guy that they needed to run on the opposite side of Bradley Chubb. Even though crazy stuff, man, Alex can drop into coverage and actually play it pretty well. Ridiculous. Anyway, Dallas at Miami. Important stuff. Huge game. Whoever loses that game is going to be called a fraud. So, just something to think about. But yeah, so the Patriots, I'm not going to waste my time talking too long about this. The Patriots have one of the better defenses in the NFL, but for the most part, their offense puts them in such bad positioning that they cannot actually be successful overall, if that makes sense for anyone. Like, your offense is so bad that it affects how it warps what we see about your defense. And that's what they're doing. Denver, they win against teams that suck. They've been winning against teams that suck all season. So the defense has stepped up. Defense has looked up. And like I said before, I remember talking about multiple times over how I need to work on separating the concept of good defense from the Denver Broncos. Maybe, just maybe, they're not too far apart anymore. Maybe, just maybe, they are one. One more time. We'll see. But yeah, Russ is playing slightly above average and not sucking. So, And when he plays slightly above average, they win games. Who would have thought? When he plays slightly above average, they get a balanced offense, and it makes them successful. So yeah. The Raiders, man. Raiders are taking a massive step forward. I remember us talking about on this podcast about your boy Aiden O'Connell and how that is not what an NFL starting quarterback looks like to me. But what I did say was when they played against the Chargers and they they played against the Chargers. Khalil Mack had 6 sacks and 2 forced fumbles. And Aiden O'Connell didn't look like ass. That game was a lot closer than it should have been. And I think that's important to take into account to what we're seeing right now, because it feels like Aiden is actually going to get like a fair shake at being the starting quarterback for the Raiders. So that's important. Kansas City. A lot of people are caught up on what their offense looks like. Their offensive problems are quite simple. They have a lot of drops in key situations. What is also not getting talked about, this is probably one of the better defenses that the Kansas City Chiefs have ever cooked up in the past like 8-9 years, basically since Alex Smith. The 2 years prior to Alex Smith leaving the team to give way to Patrick Mahomes, this is probably one of the better teams they've had in that span, right? That is important. That is drastically important because right now the defense is carrying the squad right now. Defense is out there carrying the squad, and a lot of people aren't giving them credit for it. I feel like you look at Nick Bolton, you look at Gay, and it's just like they're two of the best. They're one of the best linebacker duos in the NFL. They've got Snead out there playing corner in solo and with safety help, looking pretty good. And then of course the pass rush is there, man. Like George Karlaftis is actually playing better than a lot of people suspected that he was going to as an NFL pass rusher, man. And obviously Chris Jones still doing his thing. Chris Jones still completely destroying individuals up front and sending them into the shadow realm. And it's cool to see, man. It's cool to see, and especially in a time where everybody is quarterback obsessed. Everybody thinks that like you can't be successful unless you have a good offense, all this kind of stuff like that. The team with the best quarterback in the NFL, without question, is being led by their defense. It's kind of wild, man. It's kind of wild. Got two more games and then I'm done. New York, this is the Giants. So we're going to talk about it. The Giants thing is getting weird. The Tommy DeVito thing is getting weird. We all know what it is, right? It's the white guy in the big market. People love a good white guy success story. All he's done is overcome. Anyway, Tommy DeVito went from completing or throwing 4 passes in a game where they should have beat the Jets. I still maintain they blew that game versus the Jets. They did. They had it and then they blew it. So yeah, the Giants defense, once again, have you heard this story before? Wink Martindale has put together a good defense. Who would have thought? Never heard that story before, but yeah, the Giants are back on track, man, in terms of their defensive side. The struggles were real on defense early on in this season. Remember, they had that Dolphins game. It looked pretty rough. But yeah, the Eagles, who their opponent are. But yeah, the Giants are in the Caleb Williams sweepstakes, let's be real. And they've got 3 wins in a row. That won't mean much in the long run. But yeah, no. Shout out, Tommy DeVito probably going to get a nice backup quarterback contract out of this, man. Even though all their money is tied up in checks notes, Daniel Jones. Interesting. I wonder how they're going to get out of that one. Or are they going to try and run him back next season? That'll be fun for everybody, I'm sure. They could have paid Saquon, and instead they paid Daniel Jones. But yeah, their opponent, the Eagles. The Eagles overall, man, I feel like the Eagles have been we're about to enter a weird era because I think this is back-to-back seasons where both teams that were in the Super Bowl will make the playoffs again. And that just rarely happens. And maybe because there's more playoff spots, but really the Eagles are in competition for the division, right? But yeah, overall, the Eagles up front. Yeah, am I right? Hold on, I gotta check that. Sorry, this is a live stream. Super Bowl 2022. So yeah. 2 years ago, it was the Rams, Bengals. The Rams, the following season, made the playoffs? Right? Or am I tripping? No. This is the wrong year. Sorry. I'm trying to check this real quick. Yeah, they did. The following season, they made the playoffs. Am I bugging? I feel like I am. Conference championship, Super Bowl, they made it then, and then this is the following season. Yeah, they lost to the Packers in the playoffs. Oh wait, no, they didn't, because they would have written it. They would have written it that way. Anyway, so no, the Bengals made the playoffs the following season, and then the Rams did not. So that would have been 3 out of the last 4 Super Bowl contenders making the playoffs. And let's be real, like. The Eagles and the Chiefs are still like actual contenders to win the Super Bowl, despite what people want to talk about. Their team is pretty balanced up front. One of the big football YouTubers just posted a video, I want to say a couple days ago, about how the Eagles run a high school offense, and I guess that's supposed to be like an insult. But if you know, like, the revolutionary stuff happens at the high school level out of necessity. And that is the stuff that NFL and college coaches copy. So I don't know, like, you're running a high school offense is supposed to be some kind of insult. But anyway, for the most part, feels like Nick Sirianni's forgotten the lesson that he learned that his first season ever as a head coach that almost got him fired. I remember they played against the Saints, if I'm not mistaken, at the Superdome. Game was relatively close until it wasn't, and then they ran away with it. They go into the bye week, and I remember being on this show being like, hey man, if they just run the ball like 20 times a game, they're going to be good. And then they started running the ball with Miles Sanders, and all of a sudden they were a playoff contender. Feel like they've drifted away from that quite a bit, especially considering I want to say 3 out of the last like 4 games the Eagles have played in, it's been raining, right? So, but yeah, man, I don't know, this whole like trying to show if Jalen Hurts can be a franchise quarterback kind of thing is the path that they need to walk down, because their team doesn't lean that way. Now, we also got the other issue on the defensive side of the ball where they got a case of if the D-line don't do it, it don't get done. So, if you know what I'm talking about, the secondary for the Eagles has been on a journey, if you will, a journey of struggling and trying to reinvent themselves. And when I say reinvent themselves, they have been riding the struggle bus all season. And I don't know if it's, you'd like to say it's an adjustment to Kevin Byard being out there, but he's been there for like a couple of weeks, and typically it's either going to happen or it's not going to happen. And it doesn't feel like so far we're in an era of football where your secondary is the direct correlation of whether or not you win games. It doesn't feel like that's the case. They've also gone up against some of the best teams in the NFL week to week. I'd like to point that out. So they're going up against some of the best wide receivers. Going back and just looking at sorry, my bad. I'm trying to look at this real quick. Going back and just looking at stuff that's going down so far. They went up against the Seahawks. They lost by 3 to the Seahawks. That was with, DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett, and an emerging Jackson Smith-Njigba. Obviously, the big loss to the Cowboys when they had CeeDee Lamb, Brandon Cooks, and all those guys. The 49ers, need I say more? They lose 42-19. Deebo Samuels up front. They got Juwan Jennings, heavily underrated part of that team. George Kittle, Buffalo Bills. They got Stephon Diggs and Gabriel Davis, for whatever people have to say. They did win that game thanks to that weird overtime play where like Gabe Davis broke to the inside and Josh Allen threw the ball outside, even though he released it after he saw Gabe Davis's break out of his route, which is obviously it was an option route to read the DB's leverage, and they both misread each other. It was kind of weird. They played the Chiefs 21-17, win that game. The Chiefs with question mark wide receiver, question mark top tier wide receiver Shaheed Rice, right? They play the Cowboys again and lose that one win that one by 5, right? They play against the Commanders. The Commanders scored 31 points, which would go on. I think it's still the most points they've scored all season, and that's with like Terry McLaurin, De'Ami Brown, and a bunch of other guys as well, right? They hold the Dolphins to 17 points, right? They're playing really good wide receiver groups throughout the course of this season. They played the Rams earlier this year, 23-14 with Puka Nacua. This was not with Cooper Kupp, but this was with Puka Nacua, who has blown out every single record you can destroy as a rookie wide receiver. They've been playing top tier, elite level wide receivers. Buccaneers, Mike Evans out front, Chris Godwin. They played the Commanders again. They played the Vikings when they still had Justin Jefferson, right? They've been playing against some of the best that the game's got, and their secondary has been struggling. They really have. Really, what they've been struggling with is the motion that teams are running across the field. Anyway, but yeah, no, just something to think about. I think the Philadelphia Eagles still in contention for the Super Bowl. Obviously, my pick still lies with the Miami Dolphins. We're riding that one all the way into the sunset. Baltimore Ravens take on the San Francisco 49ers. This game is going to be amazing. Oh, I love football so much. This game is going to be so much fun. You need to set, like, look, there's a lot of good games this weekend. Dallas, Miami is going to be a lot of fun. You need to do everything in your power to make sure you watch every single second of this game. It's a Monday Night Football game on Christmas Day. Look, you need to open presents. Everybody should have their presents open. The food should be already eaten. There's the people who talk too much, the people who play cards and whatever, they need to be somewhere else. You need to be watching this game on the TV. And don't listen to those people talking about you need to hang out with your family and stuff like that. Watch this game. It's 3 hours. It's going to be amazing. It's going to be so much fun. But yeah, man, Baltimore is looking like the team that we were promised 3 years ago. Despite the fact that the injury rate is still the same level. They lost Keaton Mitchell, right? Like the injury rate is the exact same as it was these last 3 years with the Baltimore Ravens, where like they lose everything they've ever held near and dear as they're on their way to the playoffs. They have looked somewhat suspect when they have games where they don't force turnovers, which a lot of teams in the NFL look bad when they don't get extra possessions from other teams. San Francisco, look, man, they had 2 games where they looked bad, and they was talking about how Brock Purdy sucked. And then they changed their boots, and then they continue to keep putting their foot up people's ass. They have not missed a beat. Their main guys have gotten hurt for like 2 weeks. They're back, and now they're just destroying human beings. Just destroying people up front. Kind of crazy. Oh, by the way, random thing I noticed, Miami Dolphins-wise, Christian Wilkins, who easily one of my favorite D linemen in the NFL, might be my favorite one. He's a big musical guy. He's a ankle brace guy, not a ankle tape guy. I don't know, man. Kind of suspect. Little suspect. He puts ankle braces on. If you're a football player, you know what I'm talking about. If not, I don't know how to explain it. Everybody thinks you should just tape your ankles at all times because the tape is more suited. It's a better customization to your feel or whatever. And Christian Wilkins wears ankle braces. I saw him do like a heel click in the locker room for the Dolphins when they were celebrating their win last week, and I was like, ankle braces? You one of those? Anyway, that's all I got, man. That's loose thoughts. You see why it's called loose thoughts. There's a lot of shit all over the place. On the other hand, it's Christmas Eve. I got stuff to do. I actually got to go to my girlfriend's Christmas party with her family to make up for the fact that I think I've missed the last like 4 family events with her family. Anyway, make sure y'all stay safe. Wash your hands. Wash your ass, most importantly. For those of you who... actually, I forgot. I got to do a really important message on this one. For those of you who don't have people to celebrate Christmas with, or Christmas or holidays with, I wish you the happiest of holidays as well. Have a lot of fun. Hopefully you get to be around your chosen family if you can't be around your regular family and stuff like that. Or you can't be around your blood family and stuff. And, for my people out there who watch this show that have struggles with food in multitudes of ways, don't let anybody tell you how little or how much food you get to eat. It is the holidays. Everything is about moderation. That means indulgence and restriction is a big part of living life. Do not let somebody bully you about being hungry or not being hungry. Love you. Like I said, wash your hands, wash your ass, and most importantly, go home, Roger.